Individuals who took loans for business purposes will now be covered under the government's emergency credit line guarantee scheme. Those with outstanding loans of under 50 crore rupees as of February end will be eligible. Unified Payments or UPI hits a fresh high in July as transactions reach 1.49 billion. As per data released by the National Payments Corporation of India, UPI records transactions worth rupees 2.9 trillion in July, which is 11% rise. Yoga institutes and gyms to reopen outside containment zones from August 5th as per new guidelines. This applies to only the members. Oxygen saturation check and face masks will be mandatory. However, spas, saunas and swimming pools will be remain shut. SoftBank Group spends $3.8 billion buying back 63.2 million shares between July 1st to August 3rd as part of its repurchase program. Lifts shares price to 2-decade highs. The conglomerate approves 2 more tranches totaling 1.5 trillion yen. Buybacks launched post a poor earnings performance. Microsoft confirms talks with Chinese company ByteDance to acquire video platform TikTok's US business. CEO Satya Nadella discusses the potential purchase with US President Donald Trump. These talks between the two companies are to be concluded by September 15th. ByteDance, again, TikTok's parent company, accuses Facebook of plagiarism and smears on its official account. Jinri Taoteo, which is a news aggregator app owned by the company. ByteDance adds that it faced, and I quote, complex and unimaginable difficulties, end quote, while working towards growing into a global company.
Welcome to a new episode of Startup Street. Now, the government has finally allowed gyms and yoga centers to reopen under Unlock 3 starting August 5. But is it going to be feasible for gyms to stay open? And what will the new normal look like? To discuss this and the digital journey of CureFit, we have with us Mukesh Bansal. Mukesh, thank you so much for joining us. First up, what are the plans at CureFit when it comes to reopening, especially in cities like Bangalore, where the government has allowed gyms to reopen? Will you be opening up your cult fitness centers?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's definitely a welcome news that finally, I think government is lifting restriction for all the businesses. But we want to be very cautious about this. The pandemic is still very much among us. It's growing, and we are seeing the spike in cases, etc. And gyms are places where people congregate. So we want to be very careful and watchful. What we'll do is we'll take next couple of weeks to assess the situation. We will see, we've already come up with all of our protocols around hygiene standards, sanitization. We had shared it with the government. A lot of them are actually factored into guidelines. So on one hand, we feel fully prepared that we can create safe environment for our customers. But having said that, we still want to be very cautious. We want to take, guarded steps. And I think our rollout plan will be probably one gym at a time. We'll start with few centers, observe it for a few weeks. If it's going well, then expand. So overall, 100% opening for us may take as much as 2 to 3 months from now.
Okay, so one gym at a time. So then come August 5, are you going to open that one gym, say in Bangalore or any other city?
Not in August 5th. I think we'll take next couple of weeks, and probably in between August 15 to August 20th time frame is when we'll open first center. We just want to watch the situation. In Bangalore also, we are seeing quite a rapid increase in the number of cases. So we'll just, for now, we'll monitor and do dry runs and make sure, we are fully ready. We'll also gauge the customer sentiment and their readiness to come in before we start opening centers.
Okay. And you talked about the guidelines. What do you think of it? Is it going to be feasible for gyms to implement those guidelines, including, keeping 6 feet distance, working the floor area with, a capacity of 4 square meter for each person, doing oximeter checks before exercising? What do you think of the guidelines?
I think, for us as a group class format, it will be a lot easier because, we used to dedicate about, 3 square meter anyway per person. So we need to expand from 3 to 4. It's not a very big deal. A lot of our classes, we need to maintain the past also 5 to 6 feet with distance between 2 people because they are using equipment. If it's dance class or yoga class, they need to stretch. So I think its guidelines are not too far off. We think, we'll probably initially will be even more conservative than that. And if we used to have 25 people in the class, we'll probably start with only 11, 12, and slowly maybe increase to 17, 18, and then see, how it pans out.
Okay. But then, what is the threshold for cult, at your gym? What is the threshold below which you will not, it's not feasible for you to stay open? Do you have any such number for your different fitness centers?
You mean the threshold of how many people per class?
Capacity, yes.
Yeah, I think we are, the guidelines are well within our threshold. If your class, capacity is 25, and if you are only doing 7, 8, it obviously becomes very hard. But I think the guidelines will allow us to have at least, 17, 18 people per class. But as I said, we'll start more conservatively and keep the capacity to only about half. So instead of 4 square meter per person, we'll probably be, 5 to 6 square meter per person. And we'll just see the experience. We'll monitor that for a while. Fortunately, we have very large supply. We have nearly, over 200 centers in the country now. And it's not like everyone will rush in to work out on the first day. I think people also will take their time to get comfortable, get used to. So I think, guidelines are, quite comfortable as far as, a group class format is concerned.
Absolutely. I think what you mentioned is true. We have to wait and watch whether people are ready to go back to gyms. Now, what is the sentiment you have been getting when you're interacting with your customers? Are they ready to go back to your cult fitness centers?
I think they are both sets. I think there is a set of people, who are really itching to go out and resume their normal lifestyle. I think they feel being locked in at home for last 4 months is just too much, and they don't have patience left for it anymore. But then there are other set, and I think the second set is probably in majority who are still worried about the extent of pandemic outside. They are worried about catching infection, very, very cautious. In many ways, they've also gotten used to this new lifestyle where everything just happens from home. And you can, thanks to Occult, you can also work out from home, get your, all the products delivered home and so on. So my sense is, initially maybe 30 to 40% of the users who may start going in, other users will take their time. They will see if, how is the initial reaction, and then slowly. I mean, if you have to venture a guess, I'll say it'll probably take 6 months before 100% of our client base is, back into their old behavior.
Okay. So then how are you looking at restructuring? Of course, through the pandemic, you have been restructuring. You've closed down centers in the smaller towns and even in UAE, etc. You say you have 200 plus centers across the country. Will there be more consolidation? Will you be shutting down more centers now that you're looking at digital more?
Yeah, no, there is no question. I think, last 4 or 5 months and also coming, 5 months have forced us to rethink our whole business model, cost structure, etc. We are betting very heavily on digital product and services. It is much more suited to the current environment where people can access these services from home. It also in many ways expand our market. Now we are not limited to those cities or those micro markets where our centers are. We can service customers not only anywhere in India, but potentially globally as well. So we are really embracing it. This is a bit of a pivot, that's being forced on us, but there is a huge silver lining also on this. So that has put a lot of pressure on our cost structure. I think we have rationalized our cost a couple of times in last few months. I think we'll have to keep adjusting cost further. I don't think the retail business will be back to anywhere close to previous levels. So I anticipate a little bit of an ongoing cost rationalization for our offline operations.
Okay, all right. Okay. And how are your digital revenues growing? When you had talked to us last month on Young Turks, you had mentioned that you saw rupees 10 crores in digital revenues in the month of June.
Right.
How has that been growing?
Yeah, I think it's July is pretty much similar to that level. I think we think it's too early for us to predict the growth rate for that. I think we'll watch it for end of this year. My sense it will be in that range, 10 to 20 crore monthly range for next 6 months. We'll have to. It's just too early for us to forecast numbers around the growth of digital.
All right, Mukesh. Thank you so much for joining us. With that, it's time to slip into a short break, but don't go anywhere. We have a discussion coming up on what startups are looking for when it comes to IPOs. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. You're still with us on Startup Street. As tech stocks rally during this COVID-19 pandemic, Will we see more startups and unicorns in India go public? Well, Policy Bazaar is among one of the few unicorns that is likely to go public very soon. And we have with us the Group CEO, Yashish Daya, with us to talk more about that move. We also have Ramesh Kailasam of indiatech.org to discuss what it is that startups and internet companies are looking for when it comes to IPOs in India. I also have my colleague Mugdha Warrior joining us from Bengaluru. Yashish, let me start this conversation with you. You've talked about your IPO plans quite publicly and the plans to list in 2021. Will this be in India, or given the government is moving to allow Indian companies to list in foreign exchanges directly, would you consider that option as well? Help us understand what the blueprint looks like.
If the law allows us to list abroad, we would prefer that. Otherwise, we will list in Bombay.
Okay. Yashish, this is Mugdha here, and I wanted to talk to you about the profitability at Policy Bazaar, because you had hit profitability in 2017, but over the last couple of years you've seen losses. So now when it comes to the regular listing here in India, you may not be able to do the regular listing because you don't have 3 years profitability. So what route will you take for listing? What are you in talks with? Is it the QIB route?
No, I don't think the profitability is a concern. And I don't think the 3-year profitability, there are sufficient clarifications and sufficient carve-outs made in case your business is not 3 years profitable. So I don't think that is a worry or concern in any way. I think from a listing perspective, that part we are not so worried about. We've also grown about 4 times in the last 2 years. So obviously, if you grow 4 times and you take some losses for that is fine. And we are profitable again this year. But I think leaving us aside, as long as a company is close to profitability, I think IPO in India is fairly okay. It works. I think the challenge really is a lot of tech companies, and for the right reasons, have a far deeper investment curve. And I think that is the reason what you see in the public markets, for example, is InfoEdge, which has always been profitable. You see Make My Trip, which is close to profits. It's not like it hasn't been severely loss making, or at least when it went to the public, it wasn't severely loss making. You've got Just Dial, which has been profitable. I think one would struggle to take public in the Indian markets any organization that has a larger investment curve. So let me take some examples of companies that have listed in the foreign market, which would not be able to list in India, for example. So Lemonade is an insurance company, right? Deep losses, but it's valued at almost 3.5 billion. I don't think that listing is feasible in the Indian market. So there are lots of such examples which exist in the US market. So the US, as well as, let's say, Zongan went public at a valuation of $11 billion. It was a significantly loss-making company. So the point I'm making is large opportunities that can be served by companies which today make a loss are something that the foreign retail and institutional investors, both retail and institutional, I add both those, have an appreciation for. I think those organizations find less appreciation in the Indian investor context. And so I don't think it's a stock market, listing rules issue. It is more of, is the appetite for such investments there in the Indian stock market? And, without trying to be politically correct about it, my view is no. And that is why in most of the companies in the e-commerce world, you have very little money coming in from India. It's mostly coming in from foreign players, whether private or public. And the second part you see is while both US and China have raised upwards of $1 billion through public routes, through public market, India, from all the data I have, seems to have raised about $500 million from public markets for, what you would call internet age companies, in which InfoEdge would be the largest part. But that's it, right? There is nothing much raised.
Absolutely.
Outside of that.
Yes.
And we'll be fine. We'll be fine.
Yeah, I want to take this point to Ramesh as well. Ramesh, welcome to the show. And Yashish made some points about why, a lot of Indian companies may not want to go public in India. He himself said he prefers if he would be able to list abroad. You have talked to multiple unicorns in India. You've also talked to SEBI with a lot of concerns raised by startups and unicorns. Highlight some of the main concerns as to why we're not seeing a lot of Indian tech startups listing in India.
Sure. So if you look at what we had discussions in the past on the same show, India Tech was in discussions with SEBI. We pushed for the concept of differential voting rights, which didn't exist in India. Subsequently, the government of India and SEBI notified the differential voting rights. We pushed for direct listing, which the government is in the process of kind of enabling, where you can directly list abroad. But of course, it is still work in progress because you have the Ministry of Corporate Affairs needing to amend some of the regulations and also for SEBI to notify some of the stuff. So that's work in progress. But what I would like to highlight here is that we did look at the startup and the unicorn ecosystem. I had discussions with more than 50 plus founders. And one of the things that came out was that in terms of listing, if you ask the same question what you asked Yashish, the answer was that there were a bunch of people who were desirous of listing in India. There were another bunch of people who were desirous of listing outside India. And even those amongst those desirous of listing outside India had this concern that if India enables it, we may look at India. So the crowd was evenly split on that front. As far as the startups and unicorns desirous of listing in India is concerned, if you look at the options that they have today, one is the normal listing route, which of course you have the profitability clause, the net fixed assets clause, and the minimum promoter requirement of 20%. Which is strictly no-go for most of the companies which have reached a particular status, primarily because these are asset-light companies, and also the fact that many of them would have diluted below the 20% mark as far as the promoters are concerned. The obvious route, therefore, for most of them, and I'm talking about high-growth technology startups and companies and unicorns which are in the tech space and what we call as consumer internet space. Now, in the QIB listing route, 75% has to be placed through the qualified institutional buyers. When you do that, you don't attract the profitability clause nor the net fixed assets criteria, but still you hit on one thing, which is the 20% promoter requirement clause, which again brings you back to the same place saying, where do the promoters have 20% when they have grown the company to a particular level? So therefore, our interactions with multiple founders, our conclusion was that if you look at the startup ecosystem and the founders, they said we are fine with QIB listing minus, of course, the 20% minimum requirement. So therefore, our question was, what is comfortable? 99% of the answer that came was we are looking at sub 10%. So which means people are looking at single digit kind of a requirement. The prorated facility that SEBI was giving, where the investors also lock in for 3 years, for the 20% was a no-go because none of the investors would like to see their money locked in for 3 years. Apart from that, of course, SEBI did put across the IGP listing to us, and IGP was good for early stage startups. But the challenge is that you will be trapped in it for life. So therefore, we have
Ramesh,
given
if I can jump in here, if I can. Exactly. If I could jump in here, and you preempted my question. That's exactly what I wanted to know. What are your recommendations right now, given the fact that you have been talking to the ecosystem, be it startups, unicorns, or the investors, and everyone is very clear on what their demands are. So what are your recommendations that you have put across?
So our recommendations has been that, and this is something which we are in kind of a discussion stage with SEBI. What we have said is that 20% is a no-go. Therefore, we have to arrive at a common percentage, agreeable percentage that is sub 10% for founders and for promoters. And here we qualified that promoters meaning founders and co-founders only. We are not looking at investors being locked up for that number that we are talking about. The second thing that we said was the reduction in lock-in period. Now, the promoters and the investors currently would be locked in for 3 years. We said that is also a no-go. Ideally, we want a reduction in lock-in period, primarily because we are using the QIB route, where multiple rounds of due diligence has already been done on this company. It is not that a first-time promoter is hitting the market and raising money from the market, which would be a concern for retail investors. And of course, so therefore, our point has also been to SEBI that if you look at the retail investor, the QIB route, again, in terms of dilution, SEBI's concern was that what if all the investors dump on day one of listing and exit out? Our recommendation for that has been that we could possibly arrive at a conclusion where we say that you could have a staggered approach of dilution over months post the listing process, so that you don't have this issue of dumping happen.
Okay, so you have pretty much proposed a solution for every possible situation that may arise. Yashish, let me ask you at this point, what valuation are you looking at? Speaking of your IPO, will you look at any more funding before the IPO, and which is what we're trying to understand. What does a blueprint look like at this point?
We don't know what value we get, but given our size and given our profitability and given when we would be IPOing and the growth, etc., without favorable markets, we should be somewhere between $3 to $4 billion. I say without a wave, because waves can come and go, but it's a fundamental business. It's been built the solid way, and we think there are enough benchmarks. Without, I'm not looking at a Zongan or a anybody who's been very highly valued, but it's a fairly base benchmark, and we should be quite comfortable at that valuation. In terms that the people who invest at that valuation should get a very good return over the next few years.
Okay, all right. Thank you for laying out your plans for us right here on Startup Street. Yashish, Ramesh, thank you so much for being with us on Startup Street. And thanks a lot, Mugdha, for joining us for this conversation. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Startup Street. But don't go anywhere. More news and updates coming up for you on the other side. Stay tuned.